Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday Apocryphal Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Friday Apocryphal and podcast. And boy, do we have a show for you today.
Today we are covering 1 Maccabees chapters 3 through 4.
Yes, we are. Because, I would have wanted to cover more of this, but these chapters are long.
Yes.
Man, they really are.
Especially with the copious amounts of commentary that we have to go over.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So I have 1 Maccabees from the Anchor Bible, a new translation with introduction and commentary by Jonathan A. Goldstein, as well as 2 Maccabees.
Yeah, and we're going to be using 2 Maccabees for the chronology, the timeline.
Yes.
Because it's just better in that one, according to him.
And since we covered everything in the Old Testament survey,
yeah, pretty much,
we're not using that today.
We are not. But we are, however, using Erdman's commentary on the Bible.
Yes, as well as The Apocalyptic Imagination by John J. Collins.
Which, if you haven't read anything by John J. Collins, I recommend most of his work, especially on Jewish apocalypticism. He's like pretty much the leading scholar on that. In fact, once we get to Daniel, amazing. Once we get to Daniel, we are going to be covering his Hermenia commentary on it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And the last Hermenia commentary that we had was pretty darn good.
Yeah, no, Hermenia is amazing. Like, if you want good biblical commentaries, like really high quality ones, the Hermenia series is fantastic. It's not 100% complete, I don't think, but it is just absolutely wonderful. Like, you have so many in-depth textual histories and so many in-depth histories of canonization and transmission in general. It's fantastic.
Yes. But why don't we get right into it?
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything that I should cover before we go into it?
I'm just going to read a section here from Collins' work because I forgot to cover it last time, but I feel like it's still important.
Okay.
So, Martin Hengel suggested that the Apocalypse of Weeks, this is in his discussion on Enoch, but it relates to Maccabees, suggested that the Apocalypse of Weeks, the Animal Apocalypse, and the Damascus document, that's a text from Qumran, refer to the formation of a group that is mentioned in 1 Maccabees 2 as the Assembly of the Pious, or Hasidim, as I'm sure you remember. We talked about that a little bit.
Yes, we did remark briefly on it.
Yeah. Engel also attributed the book of Daniel to this group. He then takes the Hasidim as the forerunners of the Qumran community. This hypothesis is attractive in drawing together diverse pieces of evidence from the early 2nd century, but it also presents some problems. The Hasidim are mentioned 3 times in the book of Maccabees. In 1 Maccabees 2:42, they are mighty warriors of Israel who join the Maccabees after the slaughter of a group of pious Jews on the Sabbath. In 1 Maccabees 7, they seem to be identified with a group of scribes who sought peace with the high priest Alcimus, but who were taken by surprise, so that 60 of them were killed. In 2 Maccabees, Alcimus reports to the Syrian king Demetrius that, quote, those of the Jews who are called Hasidians, whose leader is Judas Maccabeus, are keeping up the war and stirring up sedition and will not let the kingdom attain tranquility. While Judas Maccabeus' relation to the Hasidim may be overstated in the latter passage, it is clear that they did support him, at least for a time, and that they participated actively in the military campaign. These 3 references are the only evidence for an organized party of Hasidim in Maccabean times. References to the Assembly of the Pious, or Hasidim, in Psalm 149, the Qumran scroll, the Qumran Psalm scroll, and that's 11Q, some other stuff. Psalms 145 and 154 and 155, and in the Psalms of Solomon cannot be taken as evidence for such a party. But then there's more, there's a little bit more on the Hasidim, but it doesn't really matter too much. But yeah, I just wanted to cover a little bit more on the Hasidim.
All right.
Just
cool.
So we have some extra context.
I find it interesting that all of these books use the name Judas Maccabeus.
Yeah.
Because I've never encountered a single Jewish person who refers to him as Judas Maccabeus. All of them say Judah Maccabee.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably just, it's a different vocalization of the same thing.
Yeah.
Because one is more Greek, I think. Wouldn't Maccabeus be more Greek?
Yeah, but
either way.
It's interesting that one terminology definitely has dominance within the literature that at least we're covering, right?
Latin, according to Ellis.
Thank you, Ellis.
Latin. Thank you, Ellis. Yes. Well, why don't I get into it then?
Sure. So just before this introductory...
Oh, my God.
Anyways, just before this introductory part, there is a little bit we should talk about. So this is under a section labeled the Acts of Judas. So the author divides this into two sections. And in the first, we meet Judas, King Antiochus IV, and his generals Gorgias or Georgius and Lysias. And then in the second, we meet Judas, King Demetrius, and his generals Nicanor and Bacchides. In each half, the author has incorporated an originally independent block of material for which there was no certain known date or context. In their present positions, Chapter 5, the campaigns against surrounding Gentiles, and Chapter 8, diplomacy with Rome, clearly interrupt the sequence of the surrounding narrative. The account of Judas, therefore, shows clear signs of the author's construction, and we should not be surprised to find that it raises some questions about some questions of sequence and dating.
All right. Well, then I'll start.
Great.
Chapter 3, 1 through 26. Judas's early victories. Judas, called Maccabeus, his son, succeeded him. This is referencing Mattathias.
Yeah.
To his aid rallied all his brothers and all the steadfast followers of his father, and they gladly fought Israel's war. So, our author stresses that both the Hasmonean family and loyal fighters of Israel recognize Judas as legitimate successor of his father, but it also says, check Ecclesiastes 4:15.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a note for the first verse of chapter 3. So Ecclesiastes 4:15. Look into it while I read off this prayer.
Found it.
Oh, you found it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
I
nice.
saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place.
Okay, well, I don't know why they said to check Ecclesiastes 4:15.
For
but
fun. Yo, check it out.
They did. Presumably because it is some kind of royal decree which determines him as legitimate successor.
Yeah.
Okay,
Probably.
that makes more sense
Yeah.
than just a neat little place to check out for fun. Do you
Yeah.
think they ever have that in the Bible? Is there ever like or even biblical apocrypha where they just quote something for no particular reason? Or do they always have a reason for quoting
they always
something?
have a reason.
Okay. There's no jokers in the Bible.
Yeah. Though
Wow.
some quotes might be idioms that we
Sure.
can't recognize exactly.
And
what
of
the
course,
reason is.
those lost books that they reference, which I'm sure were legitimate, or scrolls that were legitimate that we don't have.
Yeah.
But that's not what I mean.
Right.
Either way.
Like
Please
that's
continue.
also not just for the fun of it.
No,
Mhm.
I get that. Yeah, I know. I guess the resources that were required to produce just a scroll and a person who can read were pretty scarce.
Yeah.
And let's remember when we're covering these heroes and Maccabees that they are all supposed to pretty much imitate some other heroes in Jewish history.
Mhm.
So,
Is it easy to call this time?
oh no, it's definitely easy to call on many of these.
Okay.
Well, weren't they written about by Josephus?
Well, I mean, Josephus wrote about if we're talking about the heroes, or are we talking about like the ancient heroes or the heroes in Maccabees?
The heroes in Maccabees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that lend
Like
credence?
I think that there was probably a historical basis to this, but when we're talking about certain parallels to these ancient heroes, then I'm sure they're exaggerated in some parts. But that there was this revolt, and they had some religious catastrophe, I guess. I'm sure that kind of thing happened all the time.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, now it goes into this poem or prayer here for
Yes, and once you get through that, I do have an interesting note on it.
I'll tell you when it's over. He restored the glory of his people, putting on his breastplate like a hero, and girding on his weapons he waged war, protecting the camp with his sword. He was like a lion in his deeds, and like the king of beasts, roaring over his prey. He tracked down and pursued the wicked, and he purged the troublers of his people. The wicked were vanquished by their fear of him, and all the workers of iniquity were discomfited, and his campaign of deliverances prospered. By his deeds he brought bitterness to many kings and joy to Jacob. Forever shall his memory be blessed. He passed through the town of Judah and wiped out the impious therein and turned wrath away from Israel. His renown spread to the end of the earth as he gathered together those who were astray. And that's the end of the little poem.
Sure. So C.F. Burney argued that in the original Hebrew, the opening letters of each verse formed an acrostic of the name Yehuda the Maccabee, or Judas the Maccabee.
Oh.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's pretty interesting. There is a reference to a part in the introduction about this bit here. So
I don't have a note for that, but okay. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I didn't take note of it.
Okay, well, I'm not going to screw around with the introduction too much.
Yeah, it is quite a long introduction.
Yeah. Then Apollonius assembled Gentile troops and a large force from Samaria to wage war against Israel. When Judas received the news, he marched out to meet him, defeated him, and killed him. Many fell slain, and the rest fled. When Judas and his men took the spoils, Judas took Apollonius' sword, and ever after used it in battle.
And this is actually kind of interesting here. So Judas took Apollonius' sword and used it thereafter, a clear reference to David's use of Goliath's sword.
Yeah, if the viewers remember, Goliath.
When we were talking about 2 Samuel.
Do you remember the classic tale?
Yeah, remember David and Goliath. I know that it's a...
Forget?
Very little talked about.
Rubbed into your subconscious memory through constant pop culture media? I don't know.
There's a weird numbering structure in the beginning of the... Saron, a commander of the army of Syria, heard that Judas had gathered a band and that a company of faithful was waging war under his command. Saron said, "I shall win renown and glory in the empire by waging war against Judas and his men, who despise the word of the king."
It's kind of interesting that they would put those words in his mouth, because this guy, who's an official already, and they're pretty much already ruling over that province. What would they have to prove to beat some local rebel?
Mm-hmm.
I'll get like 50 shekels.
Those
are valid,
there are quite
right?
a few notes that I'm going to want to get into here after we get through the chapter.
Sure.
He launched a fresh expedition, accompanied by a strong force of impious men who intended to help him wreak vengeance upon the Israelite people. As Siron approached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas marched out to meet him with a small force. When the men saw the army marching against them, they said to Judas...
apparently, Josephus notes that Beth Horon was a favorite place of ambush. So just a good strategic location.
This is like where the bandits usually hang.
When the men saw the army marching against them, they said to Judas, "How can our small force fight so numerous and mighty a host, exhausted as we are today for lack of food?" Judas replied, "It is easy for many to be delivered into the hands of few. Heaven sees no difference in gaining victory through many or through a few, because victory in war does not lie in the weight of numbers, but rather strength comes from heaven. They come against us with the weight of their power for violence and wickedness, intending to destroy us and take our wives and our children as spoil. We, however, are fighting for our lives and our laws, and he will shatter them before us. You, therefore, have no fear."
This is Judas talking, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's interesting that he would, complain about that because that's something that God commanded when they did it, taking the wives and the children as spoil.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I'm not going to say that's justified under any means. It's not, but I'm just saying.
But it is something that happened.
You're surprised that it's happening to you, but you do it?
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of atheists who make a big deal out of that kind of thing specifically in the Bible.
Yeah. Although they have to remember that, that was a reference to, it's not like a law that you should just do that. It was a specific command for a specific place.
Right. And also, it was not that unheard of.
Yeah, it happened all the time.
It happened all the time.
Yeah.
So
we don't want to say it was the style at the time, but
as soon as he finished speaking, he made a sudden rush upon them, and Siron and his army were shattered before him. Judas and his men pursued him down the descent of Beth Horon as far as the plain. No fewer than 800 of his men fell slain, and the rest fled into the land of the Philistines. Judas and his brothers began to be feared, and the terror of them fell upon the neighboring Gentiles. His fame reached the king, and every nation told of Judas's battles. So a lot like David.
Yeah.
Oh, well, he hasn't had tens of thousands
No,
yet.
but he will.
He's at 800.
Just give him a moment.
It's a kill count.
Yeah.
You're getting there.
So for the prayer in verse 9, where it says, "His renown spread to the end of the earth as he gathered together those who were astray," there's a note here that says, our poet may have derived his language from Isaiah 11:12 and 12:5 after reading Isaiah 11:11 through 12:6 as a prophecy of Judas's campaigns, which are narrated in 1:5.
Yeah, so here's kind of a really interesting thing. They believed that prophecy had ceased in the land of Israel, right? But from their scriptures, they believed that it would come back at a certain time, and they also interpreted pretty much this to be the time that prophecy will return to Israel. So it's interesting their views on prophecy in general.
For the majority of this section, there's a note that says, neither our author nor Jason of Cyrene gives any indication that Judas's early operations threatened the inhabitants of the Acra. Judas was not yet strong enough to approach Jerusalem or even to block one or more of the main roads. He could only see to it that Jewish law was obeyed in the country towns and villages. In marching against Judas, the units of Apollonius and Siron probably responded to no call from the Acra, but as the nearest adequate Seleucid forces to the scene, merely did their routine duty of suppressing a troublemaker. Only after Judas's victories over Siron is Philip, the Seleucid commander at Jerusalem, reported to have called for help. And it says for verse 10, where Apollonius assembled troops in a force to wage war against Israel. It says, our author makes no effort to identify Apollonius here, just as he makes none to identify Timotheus at 5:6 and 11, or Apollonius at 1:10-69. Since Apollonius here uses troops from Samaria, Josephus had no trouble identifying him with the governor of Samaria, for the titles Meridarches and Strategos.
Famously named after the game Stratego. You know, that's after him.
Governor.
He was a governor. Very famous.
Known for the document at AJ. What is AJ?
Oh, let me see it.
I think Josephus AJ XII 5.
Antiquities of the Jews.
Okay, Antiquities of the Jews. 259 through 264. Josephus may well have been correct, and our terse author may well have omitted further identification as superfluous in a context mentioning troops from Samaria. The name, as well as further identification, may have stood in DMP and in the unabridged text of Jason of Cyrene, but all we have in the abridged history is the summary statement at 2:8-5-7. We lack evidence to decide whether this Apollonius was or was not identical with Apollonius the Misarch of 1:129 and 2:524. The abridger's note at 2:832-33 probably reflects an effort to include all deaths of persecutors. Nevertheless, the abridger includes nothing on the death of Gorgias and Gorgias, son of Idumea, and Ptolemy, whatever, son Ptolemy.
Yeah, Ptolemy.
Whatever. Son of Dorymenes and Alcimus. On the other hand, our author does not name all wicked Gentiles. It lists off some wicked Gentiles, and it says,
here they are.
What was the nature of Apollonius's force? Did it contain Samaritans, as the combination of Gentile troops and a large force from Samaria might suggest? From the time of Alexander the Great, there were no Samaritans in the pagan Greco-Macedonian city of Samaria.
Yeah, so the thing about Samaritans in general, we were, if you guys remember, we talked about this a little bit when we were covering, was it Leviticus? I forget, or maybe one of the King's books. But they were, basically half-breeds. And that's actually why Jesus in the New Testament, uses the parable of the Good Samaritan, because they were viewed as not all that great. They were kind of viewed as dirty, but it's like, oh, hey, look, they exist. The good ones exist.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So essentially what he gets to is that it's unclear what this military force actually looked like, and historically what it would look like. Because not only is there, Samaria, but there's also surrounding districts of Samaria, and there were Samaritans in Shechem, which was a surrounding district of Samaria. So there's a possibility that there were Samaritans, but we don't know. And the rest of the notes are mostly just about translation choices.
Okay.
So, do you have anything to add to that section of the chapter?
No.
Okay.
We covered everything on that one.
The king marches forward, chapter 3, verses 27 through 37. When Antiochus heard of these events, he angrily issued orders to gather all the forces of his empire, a very strong army. He opened his treasury and paid out a year's salary to his soldiers and ordered them to be ready for any emergency.
So we should talk about the actual facts of this narrative, and we should also reference the fact that in Maccabees, that is, of course, the interpretation the author is trying to give of these events. So there are some historical facts here. Antiochus gathered all the forces of his kingdom for a review at Daphne in 166 BC. He was always short of money. He was well known for his lavish giving, for example, to Rhodes, to Delos, and especially to Athens, rather than a relative by birth in charge of the Western Empire. Oh, this is uncomfortable to read that way. So I listed off the places he was giving to. Rather than a relative by birth in charge of the Western Empire and the guardian of Antiochus' son, the future Antiochus V. Some argue that 2 Maccabees 9:25 and 11:16-21 require that Antiochus V was now made royal co-regent with Antiochus IV, but in 166 BC he was only a boy aged 6. Antiochus IV marched east in the Seleucid year of 147. That's autumn of 166 through autumn of 165 BC, of course. Probably in spring 165 through the upper or inland provinces. In fact, he campaigned in Armenia along the Persian Gulf and in Elymais. I don't know how to say that. Elymaeis. Elemius. Okay, we'll go with that. Either way, and then after we're done with it, I'm just gonna read over this part on the interpretation.
Okay. And I'll also go over some notes. So, he pays a year's salary to his soldiers. Probably not all that much money, actually.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, the thing about militaries in general was they didn't really pay that much. It was mostly for the glory.
Yeah.
You get 1 shekel and 500 glory. We're not telling
Whoa. 500 glory?
That's right.
That's amazing.
I know.
It's a lot of glory.
Well, it's yearly.
Woo. He perceived that his treasury had run out of money and that the tribute from his territories was small because of the dissension and disorder which he had caused in his land by abrogating the laws which had been in force from the earliest times. He was worried lest, as had happened more than once, he might not have enough power to cover the expenditures and largeness which hitherto he had been accustomed to give with an extravagance surpassing all earlier kings. Very much perplexed, he finally decided to go to Persis. There's a note, it's probably some Persian place, and gather a large sum of money by collecting the tribute of the territories. He left Lysias, a nobleman who bore the title of kinsman of the king, in charge of imperial affairs from the Euphrates River to the borders of Egypt. Lysias was also to be the guardian of his son Antiochus until he should return. Antiochus handed over to him half of his forces. The king set out from Antioch, his capital city, in the year signs. As for the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem, he was to send against them a force to wipe out and destroy the strength of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem and erase their memory from the area, settling foreigners throughout their territory and giving out their land in allotments. Taking the remaining half of his forces, the king set out from Antioch, his capital city, in the year 147. He crossed the Euphrates River and marched through the inland territories.
Yeah, and you have to remember that this is by a different calendar. They're using a different calendar than we use today.
Yes, they...
As I mentioned, before we started reading this, around 165 is when we're talking about BC.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go into depth about the calendar.
Yeah, we did that in the first
we
first
already
episode,
did,
yeah.
but there are some notes in here about it. So if you're interested in the in-depth calendar stuff, check it out. Go buy yourself a copy, right? But so it essentially says that it was Ptolemy, son of Dorymenes, and not the king himself, who decided upon the measures to suppress Judas. Again, Jason exploits his opportunity to contradict our author. However, our author, for whom the rise of the Hasmonean dynasty was an event of cosmic importance, may be pardoned for making the need to suppress the Jewish revolt into the most important factor influencing Antiochus IV's course of action in 166/5. The full might of the Seleucid Empire was far too large to send against Judas, who later was defeated by Lysias in Antiochus V and fell to Bacchides. Certainly, however, Antiochus viewed the suppression of Judas's revolt as important. Earlier, Hyrcanus the Tobiad, in the far less sensitive area of Transjordan, committed suicide knowing that Antiochus would not tolerate his independent actions there. Ptolemaic Egypt was hostile in 166/5. Antiochus IV's nephew Demetrius was a hostage in Rome and could always become a dangerous pretender to the throne. A rebellious area near the Mediterranean coast could give Demetrius easy entry into the soil of the kingdom. Nevertheless, Judas's force was still small. To suppress it was a task which could be delegated to a subordinate, whereas the task of bringing the rich eastern satrapies,
like those are like the provinces,
back under firm Seleucid rule and collecting their taxes might turn the head of a successful subordinate and provide him with the funds to finance his rebellion, as had happened with the satrap Molon under Antiochus III. Shortages of funds had continually plagued the Seleucid Empire after Rome stripped it of its provinces in Asia Minor and saddled it with a heavy indemnity under the terms of the Peace of Apamea in 188. Hence, it is not surprising that Antiochus delegated the suppression of Judas to Lysias and set out himself to restore order and collect tribute in the east. Centuries later, the Roman historian Tacitus.
I think we actually, do we have a Tacitus book?
I'm pretty sure
here?
we do over there.
A very high chance.
Check. There are two books on the table over there. One is from Thucydides, and the other, I forget who that's from.
There might be a Tacitus.
Yeah.
Was to write in histories. After the Macedonians became the great power, King Antiochus tried to free the Jews of superstition and give them Greek ways. But he was prevented from changing the most loathsome of peoples for the better by his war with the Parthians.
Ah, look at that. Tacitus, The Annals of Imperial Rome.
Wow.
Is that the book that they're referencing?
No.
Oh.
Different book. For at that time, the Parthian king Arsaces seceded. Then, when the Macedonians were weak and the Parthians had not yet reached full stature and the Romans were far away, the Jews appointed over themselves kings. The passage might suggest that Antiochus IV's target in the east was rebellious Parthia. However, all other evidence indicates that Parthia was no menace until long after the time of Antiochus IV. The Seleucid who fought the Parthians and whose death brought the period of Macedonian weakness and Jewish kings was Antiochus the Seventh.
You know what's interesting about the Parthians? When Nero died, a lot of people thought that he didn't actually die.
Mhm.
He just went to go seek refuge with the Parthians.
Oh, cool.
I cover that in my video on Revelation.
Check it out after this.
No, Lawrence, your dog didn't die. He's just upstate with your grandparents.
Mhm. Since
Now I know.
Antiochus the Seventh never interfered with the Jews' religion, Tacitus might have confused Antiochus the Fourth with Antiochus the Seventh. Antiochus thus probably never thought of himself at leading an expedition to suppress Judas. Josephus's statement that Antiochus planned to march against Judea in the spring of 165 is probably a guess from the fact that spring was the normal campaigning season, and from 1/3/28, where Antiochus is said to have paid his troops for a full year. Since the chronology of Antiochus's plans and his eastern expedition is obscure, modern historians have been tempted to take Josephus's guess as evidence that the king marched eastward in the spring. Apart from interferences based on the normal campaigning season, there is only one piece of evidence for deciding when in the year 166/5 Antiochus marched eastward. Eusebius says that Antiochus the Fifth reigned 1 year and 6 months as Corrigan with his father Antiochus the Fourth.
Yeah, you have to remember that Eusebius was way later.
Yeah. Antiochus the Fourth's death became known at Babylon between November 20th and December 18th, 164. He died at Tabai near Isfahan, a long way from Babylon. The exact date of his death was probably a matter of indifference to the troubled successor regime governed by Lysias in the name of the child Antiochus V. Lysias may have made no effort to have the reigns of Antiochus V as sole king date from the death of his father. Probably Antiochus V was proclaimed king in his own right as of the time when the news reached Antioch, shortly after it reached Babylon. Antiochus IV probably made Antiochus V co-regent at the time of his departure eastward. If so, Antiochus V became co-regent and Antiochus IV marched 1.5 years before the news of Antiochus IV's death reached Antioch, and we could place Antiochus IV's march slightly after a date between May 20th and June 18, 165 BCE.
So that's around where Erdmann says it was, and Antiochus the Fifth would have been 6 years old.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's also some stuff here on the cuneiform kings list, but maybe you want to read it. I've been reading for a while. They talk about the kings list on that page.
One cuneiform document indeed may give evidence of the co-regency. An astronomical tablet recording observations of Mars made in 188 or 187 has on one line year 115, equivalent to 197 or 196 BCE, Antiochus and Antiochus his son, king, thus referring to the co-regency of Antiochus III and his son. Then there's some more stuff, but I think that's pretty neat. And what's interesting here is they also quote Olmsted, who I think wrote a good book on Persian history. I mean, it was a long time ago when he wrote it. I think it was back in the 20s, but I actually have that sitting on my bedside.
Oh,
I think it was him. Yeah.
Is it the same book?
No, he's referencing a different book.
Yeah.
But same author.
Oh, that's cool.
Or maybe I'm thinking of somebody else.
Yeah.
Either way.
Well, let's get into, this next section is 338 through 425. So once I reach chapter 4, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Sure.
But we're still going to be in this section.
Yeah, and once we complete the section, then we can go over the commentary, because this one also covers, parts of both chapters.
Yep. So 338 through 425, Judas defeats Nicanor and Gorgias. Thereupon, Lysias commissioned Ptolemy, the son of Dorymenes, and Nicanor and Gorgias, influential men who held the rank of friends of the king, and sent them with 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry.
Yeah, wasn't Mattathias offered friends of the king?
Yeah.
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 What happened?
What happened? I moved you guys. I'm sorry.
Wow. Good job.
This is why I usually use studio mode, but we don't do that for Friday Apocryphal Podcast.
Sure.
So they have
I gotta lock
40,000
that. I don't know how it got unlocked.
40,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry. They were to go to the land of Judah and lay it waste in accordance with the king's orders.
Either way, we're not fixed.
Oh.
No. Setting out with their entire force, they arrived and encamped near Emmaus in the plateau. The local merchants, on hearing the news, took very large sums of silver and gold coin and fetters and came to the camp intending to buy the Israelites as slaves.
Oh, no.
The expedition was also joined by a force from Idumea and the land of the Philistines. Judas and his brothers saw how very dangerous the situation was, with the enemy forces encamped within their own borders. Bearing in mind the commands which the king had issued to bring ruin and extermination upon their people, they said to one another, "Let us rebuild the wreckage of our people, and let us fight for our people and for the sanctuary." The community assembled so as to be ready for battle and to pray and ask for grace and mercy. Then there's a prayer that follows. I assume this is what they prayed.
Sure. And before you get on that,
Yep.
so again, the narrative is compounded by historical details and editorial coloring. Ptolemy, son of Dorymenes, one of the king's friends, was the governor, and that's where the word strategos comes up, in charge of Cola, Syria, and Phoenicia, and was probably responsible for the appointment of Nicanor and Gorgias. In 1 Maccabees, Nicanor plays no further part in the campaign. The active general appears to be Gorgias, who is named in 2 Maccabees as governor of Idumea. In a similar campaign in 2 Maccabees, however, Nicanor is the active general, and Gorgias the silent partner. There may be some confusion here. 1 Maccabees 7:26-50 suggests that Nicanor's activity as the leading Seleucid general took place under Demetrius I. Both 1 Maccabees 3:41 and 2 Maccabees 8:10-11 note that, and also 25 and 34, note that the Seleucids expected to make money out of selling Jewish captives into slavery.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bit of contention here on Nicanor and Gorgias in the notes. It says at 2, chapter 8, verse 9, Nicanor's father's name is given as Patroclus.
Oh, wow. It's ancient Patrick.
Yeah.
It's Romanized.
There is insufficient evidence to decide whether he was the same as Nicanor.
No, this is Patroclus.
Hi, is this the Crustius Crabicus?
No, this is Patroclus.
Oof. There is insufficient evidence to decide whether he was the same as Nicanor, the royal agent mentioned in the Samaritan correspondence quoted at Josephus, AJ 12:55. 261 through 262.
Wow.
Incredible.
Numbers. Or the same as the one or two Nicanors associated with Demetrius I. Jason of Cyrene's apparent identification of the Nicanor of 2, chapter 8, with the one of 2, 14 through 15, may be only a literary device. Josephus's identification of the Nicanor at Polybius.
Yep, another historian, Polybius.
With the one at 1:7:26 through 47 may be only a guess. Evidence is lacking too to decide whether the Gorgias here is the same as the one at 1:5:59.
Yeah, so it's like
and
the whole
as the governor of Idumea.
So it's like the whole which is which.
Yeah.
It's the third one.
I guess, yeah.
Since, however, the government would be likely to entrust an expedition into a difficult area to men already familiar with the territory, there is some reason to identify Nicanor here with the agent who had dealt with the Samaritans and Gorgias here with the governor of Idumea. So, not exact, but there's some reason. Anyways, this little prayer that they do. Jerusalem was uninhabited like a desert. None of her offspring went in or out. The temple was trampled as foreigners were in the Acra, lodging place of the Gentiles. Joy departed from Jacob, and flute and lyre ceased. That's the end of their little prayer. Presumably they mean no more psalms are being performed.
No more rituals. Like they're doing something else in the Acra now.
Yeah.
So are you at 357 yet?
No.
Okay.
I'll tell you when I get there.
Yeah, tell me when you get there.
Do you want me to tell you when I finish it or when I start it?
When you finish it.
Okay. They assembled and marched to Mizpah, opposite Jerusalem, because there had earlier been an Israelite place for prayer in Mizpah. On that day they fasted and put on sackcloth and ashes upon their heads, and they rent their garments. They spread open the scroll of the Torah at the passages where the Gentiles sought to find analogies to their idols. You know, I don't believe in the Bible proper we've had a reference to a scroll of the Torah yet.
Well, yeah, because at this point in history, there would have been something of that sort, like standardized, basically.
Right. I wonder if the Bible ever does get to that point.
Well, I mean, later.
Maybe. We'll see once we go into the New Testament, right? They took the priestly vestments and the first fruits and the tithes and assembled the Nazarites who had completed the period of their vows. Crying aloud toward heaven, they said, "What are we to do with these? Whither are we to bring them? Your sanctuary has been trampled and profaned, and your priests are in mourning and affliction. The Gentiles have gathered against us to destroy us. You know what they are plotting against us. How shall we be able to withstand them unless you come to our aid?" They sounded the trumpets and cried out in a loud voice. Thereupon, Judas appointed officers over the people. Now, all these U's that they previously had, the Nazarites, they're all capitalized. So it's presumably they're calling out to God or Yahweh or something, right? Unless they're capitalizing U for Judah Maccabee, which would be strange. Thereupon, Judas appointed officers over the people, commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens.
Wait, hundreds, fifties, and tens.
Thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens.
But no tens of thousands.
No.
Oh, man.
Not David. This guy is just comparable. He's like a lesser David.
Yeah. Aren't they all?
Yeah. He ordered all who had built houses or betrothed wives or planted vineyards or who were timid to go home as required by the Torah. The army marched and encamped south of Emmaus. That's the end of 57.
Okay, so note here, Bar Kokhba, actually, it's somebody else. It's not the guy that you're probably thinking of. But he argues that 357, in its present position, interrupts the sequence of preparatory events at Mizpah and properly belongs after 4-4.
Oh. Let me see if there's a note specifically about that.
And so apparently Bar Kokhba wrote this in 1989, and I have no idea when that commentary was written. Because obviously, if it was written afterwards.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff here. Apparently, Emmaus is spelled differently. But
I mean, that could just be a scribal thing.
yeah.
Although it could also be like a regional thing as well. Where they spell words differently.
And he talks about like travel and trade routes, basically. But Judas never is reported to have sought Ptolemaic aid, and the large Seleucid force surely intended to take the offensive. Slave traders came in large numbers, as if they expected the Seleucid army soon would make a decisive blow against the Jewish rebels. Judas moved promptly, as if forced to counter an offensive threat. We may guess that the Seleucid force was large enough to move simultaneously on several routes to join forces with their allies in the Acra and Jerusalem, and that Judas's force was too small to block all these roads. By moving to the high ground south of Emmaus, Judas could have observed any moves from the Seleucid camp along the northern approaches to Jerusalem, as well as any move to use the southern approaches. From his campsite, Judas could also, if necessary, withdraw into friendly hill country. Finally, Judas's presence near the Seleucid camp might make Gorgias and Nicanor think twice before dividing their forces and reducing the strength of their main base at Emmaus. If so, Gorgias's rashness was to solve Judas's problems for him, allowing Judas to rout the whole expedition. So that's their note on this place south of Emmaus.
Gotcha.
It's a good lookout point. There Judas spoke. Prepare yourselves for battle and be brave. Be ready early in the morning to fight these Gentiles who have gathered against us to destroy us in our sanctuary. For it is better for us to die in battle than to stand by and watch the outrages against our people and our sanctuary. As he wills in heaven, so will he do. That's the end of chapter 3 of First Maccabees.
Yeah, these are long chapters.
Yeah, if you're enjoying the stream so far, give us a like or a dislike. It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. Share it around.
Share it around.
Get some people in here.
Friends, family, neighbors, countrymen.
And subscribe if you haven't.
Yep. And a shilling. All the other shilling. We're shilling for shillings. Send us shillings.
We'll show a little bit later. Anyways. Chapter 4.
Yes.
Gorgias took a force of 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry. The detachment set out during the night, intending to fall upon the camp of the Jews and to take them by surprise. The men of the Acra served him as guides. Judas, however, learned of their plan. He set out himself with his warriors to attack the king's force at Emmaus, while Gorgias's troops were still away from the camp. Gorgias marched by night to the camp of Judas and found no one there. He searched the mountains for Judas's men, saying, "They are fleeing from us." At daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men, though their armor and swords were not such as they would have wished to have.
Tell me when you get to the end of verse 11.
Okay. They saw a strong camp of Gentiles armed with breastplates, surrounded by outposts of cavalry, and the enemy were veteran soldiers. Judas, however, said to the men with him, Have no fear of their numbers, and do not be dismayed at their onslaught. Remember how our forefathers were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh was pursuing them with an army. Now, too, let us cry to heaven. If he grants us his favor, remembering his covenant with our forefathers, he will smash this army before us today, so that all the Gentiles will know that there is a Redeemer and Savior of Israel. So that is the end of 11.
Okay, it says here, for the Nazarites, the trumpets are sounded, and that is described in Numbers 10:9 and Judges 7:18, 22. Judas appoints leaders as Moses did in Exodus 18:21, 25, and Deuteronomy 1:15, and picked his men in accordance with Deuteronomistic law. He gives this homily in 4:8 through 11, and he quotes Psalm 136. Psalm 136 verses...
We sadly have not gotten there yet.
What? I know. We're not into the 130s even.
Yeah.
No, we're not.
We're at what?
Verses...
We're at the 100 and like...
We're in the 90s.
Oh, we're in the 90s.
Running in the 90s.
I was thinking of the last thing we read, which went into the hundreds.
So in 130... There's so many Psalms. 136, 23 through 24. This one says, who remembered us in our lowest state, for his mercy endureth forever, and hath delivered us from our adversaries, for his mercy endureth forever. So it's talking about his mercy enduring forever. So
Really?
there is your Psalms reference.
Amazing.
I'm sure you're glad.
It all comes back together, doesn't it?
Woohoo.
Yeah. The foreigners caught sight of Judas and his men advancing against them. As the foreigners marched out of their camp for battle, Judas's men sounded their trumpets, and of course, if you remember, the trumpet sounding for Jericho. Yeah. When battle was joined, the Gentiles broke and fled toward the plain. The hindmost all being cut down by the sword. They pursued them as far as Gezerah and the plains of Idumea, Azotus, and Gemnia, which actually, interesting thing about Gemnia was, for a long time it was thought that there was a council there in 90 CE that decided on ratification of the Torah, but that was debunked. Semi recently, like not this century, but like it was that position was held for a lot longer than it should have been held. But that's just an interesting thing there. No fewer than 3,000 of the enemy fell. When Judas and his force returned from pursuing them, he told the people, "Do not be greedy for the spoils, for a battle lies ahead of us. Gorgias and his force are in the mountains near us. Rather, stand to face our enemies and fight them, and afterwards, confidently take the spoils." Judas was still completing his speech when a unit of Gorgias's army was seen looking down from the mountains. The men perceived that their comrades had been routed and that the Jews were setting fire to the camp, for the smoke was visible to show what had happened. I'm not sure. That might, kind of be a reference to the pillar of fire. Maybe not.
Maybe.
On seeing this, they were greatly dismayed. On seeing also that Judas's army was in the plain ready for battle, they all fled to the land of the Philistines. Judas returned to take the spoils of the camp. They took large sums of gold and silver coin and cloth dyed marine blue and purple and other rich booty. On returning to their base, they sang hymns of thanksgiving to heaven, For he is good, for his mercy endures forever. A great victory was won for Israel on that day. And there's a note here about the marine blue and purple.
What verse are you at, by the way?
Oh, that was the end of 25.
25. Okay.
So I'm going to read this note, and then you can add whatever.
Okay.
So yeah, marine blue and purple. The two famous Tyrian dyes made from the marine mollusk. Oh boy, this name. Murex brandaris. The word marine here distinguishes them from imitations made from other sources. In the Hebrew, the adjective corresponding to marine followed both nouns in accordance with Hebrew word order. The Greek translator wrongly applied it only to the second, purple.
Now, here's an interesting tidbit of history that I know about, is that the specific marine animal that you just referred to is a slug, or a marine slug, and it is very toxic. Touching it's bad. Not to mention getting shot by one of its harpoons that it uses to feed on things will kill you. It's known as one of the most deadly animals, actually, and the reasoning behind the regal purple is because of how hard it was to get off of those creatures' shells. And you get real lucky sometimes and find like a hermit crab with one, but usually you'd have to fight one of these things, and they're pretty agile, surprisingly. They're a predatorial slug. They swim pretty quick. So,
wow.
Good luck getting them on your own. You usually find them dead. That's how you get lucky. But
that's weird that you know that.
Yeah, and it's the reason behind the scarcity of the dye in general, and the authenticity is important here.
Huh. Well, I mean, yeah, the authenticity is definitely
Weird
important.
that I know
yeah.
that. I'm an encyclopedia of useless knowledge.
That's true.
That's what I'm here for beyond tech. So,
but you know what? Now we know more about a slug.
Yeah,
I
congrats.
guess. Tell me when you get to the end of verse 35.
Okay, that's actually the end of this next section here. And yeah, I also have quite a bit of notes, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
The surviving foreign troops came to Lysias and reported all that had happened. On hearing the news, Lysias was perturbed. Yeah, Lysias was perturbed and disheartened because the outcome for Israel had met neither his own wishes nor the commands he had received from the king, which I would assume are the same wishes. During the year which followed, I think there should be a note on that somewhere, he mustered 60,000 first-class troops and 5,000 cavalry, so as to bring to an end the war with the Jews. They marched into Idumea and encamped at Beth-zur. Judas came to meet them with 10,000 men. He saw how strong was the encampment and prayed, "Blessed are you, Savior of Israel, who broke the onslaught of the mighty by the hand of your servant David, and gave the camp of the Philistines into the hand of Jonathan, son of Saul, and his armor-bearer. Deliver this camp into the hand of your people Israel, and let them be disappointed by their infantry and cavalry. Put cowardice in their hearts, and cause their bold confidence to melt, and let them totter in defeat. Make them fall by the swords of those who love you, and let all who know your name sing hymns of praise to you." They joined battle, and from the camp of Lysias no fewer than 5,000 men fell as they were routed before them. On seeing the severe reverse suffered by his troops and the boldness exhibited by Judas, perceiving that they were prepared either to live or to die nobly, Lysias departed for Antioch and raised a very large mercenary force, intending to invade Judea again. That was the end of 35.
All right.
I was going to just say that those numbers feel inflated, perhaps. They may not be, but they feel inflated like in normal biblical texts. Like, divide those numbers by 10. He's got 100 guys.
I mean,
they
I'm
got
not
600 guys and 50 horsemen. That makes way more sense. I don't know. Sometimes those numbers are out of control. These are just a little bit haphazardly high.
So, The report of the fourth campaign, led by Lysias, the man with overall political and military responsibility for the whole of the Western Seleucid Empire, is surprisingly brief and lacking in detail. The next year is presumably year 148 of the Greek kingdom, that is, the year beginning spring or autumn 165 BC. Lysias, with 60,000 picked infantry and 5,000 cavalry, invades Idumea, camps at Bethsur, and meets Judas with 10,000 men. The imbalance is made clear. Judas prays, recalling God's past saving acts by the hands of David and Jonathan. Lysias loses 5,000 men, and observing Jewish determination, retreats. The lack of detail suggests to Morcombe and others that this account is a doublet of Lysias's later campaign to Idumea and Bethzur. A careful reading of the accounts of these four campaigns thus suggests that the author is being forced to make the best of limited source material. For the first campaign, the author knows only the name of the enemy commander. For the second, only the name of the enemy commander, the place of the battle, and the number of enemy fallen. The account of the third campaign has much more circumstantial detail and in general outline seems highly credible. The fourth campaign may be a doublet, though the evidence of Lysias's letter dated year 148 suggests that something had happened sufficient to persuade Lysias that the peace talks were necessary, and a defeat of Lysias at this stage is not ruled out. These four campaigns have been heavily colored by material portraying Judas in biblical terms, and none of them contains any reference to dates, whether from the Seleucid or Jewish calendar, apart from the phrase the next year in 428. The author dates these campaigns by placing the first two between the death of Mattathias in year 146 and Antiochus' departure for the east in year 147, and the second two between that event and the rededication of the temple in the month Chislev of the year 148. These points suggest that the author has drawn on Jewish oral sources for the contents of the stories, has elaborated them from biblical material, and dated them by relating them to other known events. The details of the early career of Judas are less certain than is often assumed.
Definitely, and here's just a little bit about the dating. Just because we talked in the first episode on First Maccabees about the two calendars that were probably used for this.
Yeah.
So on the thing about the next year, or during the year which followed, our author dates Lysias's preparations for his expedition, quote, during the year which followed. The Greek translator of First Maccabees throughout observes strictly the distinctions between the Greek calendar year and the in Greek it's etos, calendar year, and eniatos, year-long period of time. The Hebrew sene can mean either, though year-long period, can mean either, though year-long period can be unambiguously expressed by senet, and I'm not even sure how I would pronounce this, yim. That sounds ridiculous.
Yum.
In Genesis 41:1, or by yim alone in Leviticus. Whatever the original Hebrew here, the translator appears to have rendered the author's meaning correctly. The author was intentionally vague within the year-long period which followed the defeat of Gorgias and Nicanor. Lysias prepared a new expedition and then marched. Our author was a Hasmonean propagandist. He did not wish to publicize the awkward interval of months of inaction which elapsed between Lysias's withdrawal and the dedication of the new altar. So that was neat.
All right.
And there's some more stuff on chronology, obviously.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Why don't you get into the rest of the chapter?
Sure. Thereupon, Judas and his brothers said, now our enemies have been defeated. Let us go purify the sanctuary and restore it. The entire army assembled, and they went up to Mount Zion. of course, Jerusalem. They saw the temple laid desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned, and the courts overgrown with plants as in a thicket, or like one of the mountains, and the chambers laid in ruins. Do you have any notes on the one of the mountains? Because I'm going to look that up here quick.
Well, it says here.
It's verse 38, by the way.
Mount Zion was an old name for the city of David. The holy mount. It has become a synonym for the holy mountain, the site of the temple. The temple and sanctuary appear to have fallen into disrepair after 3 years' neglect, though Menelaus was still high priest, and priests were available.
Just so we're clear, this dude's discussion on the first two verses is like 4 pages long. The first 2 verses.
Yeah.
We're not going to go over all that.
Yeah. The burning of the gates is mentioned here and in 2 Maccabees 1:8, where it's credited to Jason. Presumably this attack on Jerusalem, and in the narrative of 2 Maccabees 8:33. The event must therefore be dated to 168 BC. It left a deep impression.
So I checked on some of these this imagery, and so like when they're talking about profando is profaned by the abomination of desolation. There's also something about that in Psalms and of course Daniel. The gates burned, also another reference to Psalm 74, apparently, which we've already discussed on Atheist Sunday School. And then about the courts in the mountains. This passage probably does not refer to pagan usages such as sacred groves and asherahs, which Antiochus IV might have required to be set up in the temple, though Bickerman so interpreted the words. The plants which overgrew the temple area are called phyta in Greek, a word which is never used for tree or Asherah in the Greek Bible. And the whole context after mentioning the desecrated altar treats only devastation and neglect, not the imposition of idolatrous practices. Okay.
So it's just shrubs and overgrown stuff from neglect.
Pretty much. Anyways, they rent their garments and made great lamentation and put on ashes, as you do. They prostrated themselves upon the ground and sounded the signal trumpets and cried out to heaven. Then Judas assigned soldiers the duty of fighting the men in the Acra, while he purified the sanctuary. He appointed unblemished priests, lovers of the Torah, who purified the sanctuary and removed the stones of the loathsome structure to an unclean place.
So I'm going to go into detail here.
Okay.
The rededication is dated to the month of Chislev in year 148, which is usually reckoned as December, but may well rather be a different year. Bringman says so, I guess. This would give sufficient time for the news of this event and of Lysias' defeat to reach Antiochus IV in the east before his death, as well as for various campaigns described in 1 Maccabees 5. The date of Antiochus' death is firmly located between 19 and 20th November and 18/19 December 164 BC by the information given by a Babylonian cuneiform tablet preserved in the British Museum. The sequence of events given by 1 Maccabees is to be preferred to that given by 2 Maccabees, in which the temple rededication follows the death of Antiochus. And it says here, Deuteronomy 12:2-4, made clear that pagan sites of worship must be totally destroyed. But the priests hesitated to destroy the temporarily profaned Israelite altar of burnt offering. They therefore stored its stones provisionally to await some prophetic insight on the problem. The author of First Maccabees believed that prophecy had ceased, at least for the present, but was aware of the expectation of a prophet to come. According to First Maccabees 14:41, the Jews appointed Simon leader and high priest until a trustworthy prophet shall arise. Similarly, in Nehemiah 7:65, certain families were excluded from the priesthood until a priest with Urim and Thummim, i.e. the tools of oracle giving, should come.
And we talked about those things a lot, so I'm glad we have a much clearer explanation.
It further says the dedication of the new altar took place on 25 Chislev in the year 148. That is probably December 165 BC. Appropriately on the third anniversary of the first pagan sacrifice on the old altar.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So anyways, they removed the stones. They deliberated over what they should do with the profaned altar of the burnt offering, and they came up with the good idea of dismantling it, lest the fact that the Gentiles had defiled it should be held to their disgrace. Accordingly, they dismantled the altar and put its stones away on the Temple Mount in a suitable place until a prophet should come to give an oracle concerning them. Taking uncut stones as prescribed by the Torah, they built a new altar after the pattern of the old. They repaired the sanctuary and sanctified the interior of the house and the courts. They also made new sacred vessels, and they brought the candelabrum and the altar of incense and the table into the nave. They burned incense on the altar and kindled the lights on the candelabrum, so that they illuminated the nave. They set loaves upon the table and hung the curtains and brought to completion all the work which they had done. So, of course, they have all these instructions in Exodus and Leviticus.
Yes.
Very detailed instructions.
Very detailed.
So detailed, it made me want to stop reading entirely.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways. Where was I? Right. They rose early on the morning of the 25th day of the 9th month, that is the month of Kislev, in the year 148, and they brought a sacrifice according to the Torah upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had built. At the very time of year, and on the very day on which the Gentiles had profaned the altar, it was dedicated to the sound of singing and harps and lyres and cymbals. The entire people prostrated themselves and bowed and gave thanks to heaven who had brought them victory. And even though, we don't get direct action from God, like God did this or God did that, obviously all the prayers and stuff. Yeah. So anyways, they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days, joyfully bringing burnt offerings and sacrificing peace offerings and thank offerings. They decorated the front of the nave with golden cornices? Yeah, cornices, I guess. Yeah,
Cornices.
And bosses, and restored the gates and the chambers and fitted them with doors. The people were overjoyed as the shame inflicted by the Gentiles was removed. Judas and his brothers and the entire assembly of Israel decreed that the days of the dedication of the altar should be observed at their time of year annually for 8 days, beginning with the 25th of the month of Kislev, with joy and gladness. At that time, they also forfeited Mount Zion, surrounding it with a high wall and strong towers to prevent the Gentiles from ever coming and trampling it. Oof. As they had done before. He posted a special force there to guard it, and he fortified Beth Zur so that the people might have a fortress facing Idumea.
So, about this festival, similar music was used at the dedication of the walls of Jerusalem by Nehemiah, Nehemiah 12:27. The 8-day celebration recalls Hezekiah's purification of the temple, 2 Chronicles 29:12-19. as well as Solomon's dedication of the temple in the 17th month, 1 Kings 8:65 through 66, 2 Chronicles 7:8 through 9. At the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, Leviticus 23:33 through 43, 2 Maccabees 1:18 and 10:6 compare this festival of purification with tabernacles. It seems natural that this new December festival borrowed from this autumnal feast, at which people offered sacrifices and processed with branches of palms and other trees. 2 Maccabees 10:7 says that the Jews carried branches and also fronds of palm. Wands, thrissoi, and ivy wreaths were carried in procession at festivals in honor of the Greek god Dionysus, which this feast of dedication, Hebrew Hanukkah, was perhaps partly intended to counter. 1 Maccabees 4:59 provides for the continuance of this feast. 2 Maccabees 1:7 and 9 refer to its celebration in the years 169 and 188 and associate it with lighting the lamps. In the 1st century AD, Josephus called the feast lights.
Festival of Lights. Yep.
Yes. The festal letter of 2 Maccabees 1:10 through 2:18 associates the feast of purification with the miracle of fire from heaven. 2 Maccabees 1:18 to 9 through 11. See 2 Chronicles 7:1.
So the this idea we have of the caricature of Hanukkah, the Hanukkah story, comes from 2 Maccabees then.
Yep. And John 10:22 refers to this as the winter feast of rededication.
All right. Sweet.
That's all
And then
the notes.
I have one last note, because in the last line there's actually a break. He posted a special force there to guard it, and he fortified ... Beth Zur, so that the people might have a fortress facing Idumea. Where my translation shows a gap, the Greek text is probably corrupt, having inelegantly repetitious to guard it, even in quotes to guard it, even more.
Thank you, Johnny Spinoza.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate
Yes,
the
for
donation.
the $4.99. Thank you.
Yeah. And by the way, viewers, we've got a donation drive going on right now. Once we hit $666, we will be doing alchemy.
Yes, good old alchemy. Gotta love it, I guess.
Yep.
Anyways, having an inelegantly repetitious to guard it, even more inelegant because the sentence ends with another infinitive of purpose, which I have rendered by so that ... Idumea. So that, the end there. The gap can be filled from Josephus, who probably possessed a correct text. And he is, of course, referencing Antiquities of the Jews. The missing words are the town. And then he says a cross-reference, 1 Maccabees 6:7 and 9:50 and 52, and then 2 Chronicles 8:2 and 5. Perhaps in an early copy, the words Tinpolen, that's the town, became effaced, or only the letters te remain visible. If so, later scribes would try to restore the text by using to guard it from the preceding clause. Sweet.
All right. Well,
because in the Greek, to guard it
it
has that in there. So anyways, that is the end of the reading for the day.
Yep. 2 chapters, but a pretty beefy 2 chapters.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yep. And
good
on
episode, another hour 25 or so.
Yeah. And
exactly.
on Sunday, we are getting into more Psalms.
Yeah, Psalms 90 through 96. We are starting the 4th Psalter.
Wonderful.
If you guys enjoyed the stream, make sure you drop a like.
Give me that.
This?
Yeah, give me that.
Okay. Do you want a pen too?
No.
Oh, okay.
Wait, yeah. We're at 90 through 96.
We're going to be, yeah.
Okay. Well, viewers, I hope you're excited because this upcoming Atheist Sunday School is going to be the 16th episode, the 16th week we've been doing Psalms.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And last time you said you were experiencing fatigue finally. Yeah, I know you're patient.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And we have it scheduled for 25 weeks total, which means there will only be, after next time, 9 more weeks of Psalms.
And maybe then we can have some interesting continuity and dialogue. Ooh.
No, because after that we have Proverbs.
Yep.
Life is bad.
Well, Proverbs is at least better than Psalms.
It's a little more interesting.
It's like, I don't know. It isn't like Psalms, at least.
Yeah. Either way. Make sure you like, subscribe, share the stuff around if you so appreciate it. We also have Patreon. On Patreon, you can get a lot of cool rewards. You could be on the show. You can get some shirts, a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, we're doing a t-shirt giveaway.
Next.
Is it this?
Next episode,
What's
maybe?
Sunday? Is Sunday?
It's the 29th. It's a leap year.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
No t-shirt giveaway yet.
All right. No t-shirt giveaway.
It's a normal
yet.
month instead of being a short month. Oh, it's
Yeah.
still short, but it's almost a normal month this year.
That's right. So
Yeah, and we also have a Teespring if you don't want to, donate monthly.
and our
get your-
Amazon wish list is incredible.
Yes. If you want us to cover something or have more in-depth commentaries on anything, you can get something off of our Amazon wish list. Link, Nightbot might post it eventually, but also the link is in the description. And we will use these things as sources.
Yeah, we will. I'm almost finished with that Hitler's Holy Relics book.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's been pretty cool. I don't know how much I'm going to source from it.
But you got some stuff there.
I've got some stuff.
Yeah. What else we got? Facebook and Twitter. It's free to follow us on those things.
Yep. And it's free to, tell people about us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just talk to people. Tell them Milwaukee Atheist is the best YouTube channel I've ever seen in my life.
Damn straight. But that's the end of the show for today.
Yep.
And until next time, which is Sunday, we will
See you
you on
Sunday.
Sunday.